Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to have Bob Knakal as my guest here today on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Bob was chairman and founding partner of Massey Realty Services, New York's #1 building sales firm. He started his real estate career in 1984 at CBRE, where he met Paul Massey. They left CBRE in 1988 to form Massey Knakal. Together, they closed over 6,000 transactions with an aggregate value of $23 billion. To date, Bob has personally been responsible for selling over 2,222 buildings, considered the highest total ever for a single broker in New York. But Bob wants to get to that 3,000 number. In addition, Bob has personally handled the sale of over 250 development sites, totaling over $7 billion in sales. In 2014, Cushman Wakefield acquired Massey Knakal, where Bob acted as chairman of New York investment sales. He was ranked the top originating investment sales broker and has won some of commercial real estate's highest awards, even a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Real Estate Board of New York. In 2018, Jones Lang LaSalle came calling. Bob joined as chairman of New York Investment Sales and Capital Markets. Bob, thank you so much for joining me today as my guest on the Anti-Architect Podcast.
Great to be here today.
Awesome. So my audience is a lot of architects that listen, and I'm going to speak for many of them and say that the real estate transaction side of what you do and what we do of our business is a bit of a mystery to the creative people. And obviously, we all work together. And I would say if there is a real estate food chain, we architects are down near the bottom, probably a little bit above furniture people. And I say that tongue in cheek, and I have a lot of furniture friends. They'll appreciate the dig. But you guys really kind of control a lot of that process. Can you just explain, I think for the audience and even for me, the different types of commercial real estate brokers? Because you hear things like tenant reps and leasing agents, and then what you do on the sales side, which is really even further removed from kind of what we deal with.
Well, Christian, I think that's a great question because, sometimes I'm approached by young folks and they say, hey, I want to be a real estate broker. And I say, okay, but that doesn't tell me very much. What kind of real estate broker do you want to be? There are residential brokers that sell apartments. There are residential brokers that lease apartments. There are commercial brokers that broker mortgages, that lease retail space, try to rent office space, sell buildings. So there's so many different types of brokers. What I do is I sell properties. People ask me what I do for a living. I say I sell buildings. And I've been selling buildings in New York since 1984. Absolutely love it. And it is a very specialized type of brokerage, as they all are. But I think that's one of the things that's important if you want to really be able to differentiate yourself, is to specialize in one type of thing. So at my old company, what we did is specialize geographically, wanting to know more about any neighborhood than any other broker. And so we had brokers in each neighborhood, and that really gave us a very granular understanding of what was happening in the area. It also put us in a position where when someone would hire us to sell a building for them, we could be a better advocate for them, explaining to buyers why they should pay more for a particular property. But there's all different kinds of ways that you can specialize also. We specialize geographically. You can specialize by product type or type of transaction or selling notes for banks. There are so many different things, even on the investment sales side, right, that it's highly specialized. And the more specialized you are, the easier it is to articulate how you're different from everybody else. And that difference is really what creates a competitive advantage for the broker.
Wow. Okay. So in terms of, so I feel like with you, a lot of times in terms of the interaction with architects, you're probably way ahead of the game because you're doing the sale of the property, and then maybe that whoever's buying it may turn around and convert it or something like that. I'm just shocked that there are, we said in your intro, it was 6,000 buildings, that you sold alone.
Well, no, that's Massey Knakal sold over 6,000 buildings personally. As of last week, I'm up to 2,229.
Oh, nice. Congrats. So with that, I was going through your book here, and of course, this is an audio podcast, so hard to see, but you have in your book this giant baseball card, which I love. And on the back, you have sort of your stats, right? And you give your height and weight, which I think is hilarious. I love that you say you sell 24/7, which is great. But then there's one thing that really stuck out to me is cold calls every day. I think of, do you think we rely right now too much on email and social media and not that kind of picking up the phone and calling people?
I think that, the interesting thing about that is that in a way, everyone in the real estate business pretty much is a salesperson. Whether you're an architect, a broker, a banker, a lawyer, you have to go out and constantly get new clients. And I think to sit back on your laurels and wait for business to come to you, works for some people. But if you really want to be at the top of the game, you have to do everything you can to proactively try to get new clients. And so cold calling or prospecting, as we call it, is something that is critical. In fact, for my entire career, and I'm now in year 39, but up until the pandemic, it was my goal to speak to 50 property owners every week and get around to asking them if there was anything in their portfolio they wanted to sell. During the pandemic, working from home, I actually was a lot more productive because I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, but Seinfeld has something called the stop and chat. Uh-huh. And what I found is that in the office, the stop and chat kills a lot of time. Somebody asks you how your weekend was, and all of a sudden 8 minutes have gone by and you haven't been working during that time. So home during the pandemic didn't have the stop and chats, didn't have the interruptions. And I actually got up to over 100 connections with owners a week. And that is really the keystone. The most important thing in my practice is making sure every week I'm making calls to owners, finding out what they're looking to do, what their objectives are, how I might be able to help them. And then ultimately, if there's anything that I can sell for them. Because as we talked about specialization within brokerage, even in investment sales, I'm a broker who only represents sellers. In 2,227 of those 2,229 transactions, I exclusively represented the seller. So the overwhelming majority has been seller rep. I only work on exclusives. I only represent sellers. That's a formula that has worked for me. But in order to do that successfully, you have to bring business in from new clients. So we're constantly creating market information, creating content that we share with our clients and potential clients, sharing market data, trying to impress upon folks that we understand the market very well and that if they did want to sell, we're in a position to help them maximize their sale price. So that proactive outreach to the marketplace is very, very important in terms of finding new clients. With respect to our interaction with architects, there are two main product types that we interact with architects on more frequently than others. Firstly, it's obvious development sites, because that's a property where the new building has to be created, and architecture, both externally and internally, is an important part of that. And the other type of property where we are involved with architects are generally on smaller vacant commercial buildings that we call user buildings. A user building being one that's going to be purchased by an occupier of the space or a user for their own headquarters. And typically when we're showing those buildings, The potential buyer will come in, take a look around, say, hey, this looks pretty interesting. But just about every building that's vacant, whether it's in great shape or terrible shape, is going to be completely redone to the buyer's specifications. So they tend to get their architect involved very early in the process. And sometimes even before they've made a bid, they want to know how much it's going to cost to do what they want to do. So the architect is there at the beginning of the process. On the development sites, typically a developer is involved talking to their zoning expert, getting a massing study so they understand what shape the building can have contextually. And then I think that the architect gets involved a little later on. Once the developer has purchased the property, they know how much they can build, what that building can consist of, and then they're bringing the architect in to do interior layouts and that kind of thing, and to spruce up what the exterior architecture can look like.
Sure. And so back to kind of getting the clients and all that during COVID, are you actually doing the cold calling yourself?
Absolutely.
So you're not hiring a bunch of, kids out of school and having them do it, sort of. That's what I always hear from the young brokers is, oh, that's what they make you do is, you got to do all the cold calling, and the more senior brokers kind of sweep in and then make the accounts happen, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Christian, I think that is a fallacy. And I have tried everything under the sun to prospect more efficiently. I've tried hiring kids out of college. I've tried hiring experienced people. I've tried hiring people who were salespeople at IBM. I've tried everything under the sun. And unfortunately, getting through to a particular owner is not necessarily easy. And if a newer person with less experience does happen to get an owner on the phone, how likely it is that that owner is going to confide in somebody they don't know that has no experience. So I think the quality of leads produced by people who are less experienced is not great. And I think a lot of folks who are interested in selling their buildings are not going to give that information to somebody they don't know well. So I found that the highest efficacy you can have in making cold calls is when those calls are made by someone that has the experience, track record, reputation, and then owners are much more likely to share that information that they want to sell. Particularly in a down market like we're in now, a lot of folks are not discretionary sellers, and they're not selling because their property tripled in value. They're selling because there may be a need to sell for one reason or another. They can't effectuate a refinancing, or they lost a major tenant, or the building requires extensive upgrading to make it competitive in the rental market, and they don't have the money to put into the building, and the building is suffering because it can't attract tenants. So there are a number of reasons that might be considered a little embarrassing, that an owner might not want to confide in somebody that they don't know. So the prospecting, I believe, is best done by the folks who have more experience. And that prospecting takes all forms. Cold calling, making phone calls is a great one, but texting, emailing, we still send a lot of hard mail. That baseball card went out, 10,000 of those went out to the market in good old-fashioned U.S. postal mail. And networking is another big part of what we do. I find that over the years, people work with folks they like. And it's much easier to develop a really strong relationship and bond with somebody if you've met them, you've had breakfast with them, lunch, a drink, dinner, met them at a conference. And once you have that personal relationship, it makes building that relationship a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't think people realize what it takes to even start those relationships and then maintain them and then make them real relationships. I would say in my career, someone, a mentor of mine told me, if I wanted to make my way as a principal in an architecture firm, I needed to bring in work. And I was young. This is probably 20 years ago. And I thought, okay, I'll bring in work. How the heck do I do that? And they said, well, you need to start going to industry events, and you need to meet people. You need to ask them out to lunch or to breakfast or drinks. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do that? I'm pretty outgoing, but I don't like going up to strangers and asking them to lunch. It seems just so awkward. And he said to me, there's a networking event coming up. You're going to come and you need to bring back 3 business cards. And of those 3 business cards, you need to ask all 3 of those people out to breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or drinks, or whatever. And I remember doing that, and I got the business cards. I remember I specifically got 3, right? No more. I was just going to do 3. And I was so nervous in reaching out. This was really before. It wasn't before email, but picking up the phone was definitely a preferred method than emailing. And to this day, one of those people is actually a very good friend and actually gives us, a lot of work, hands us a lot of work. And it's funny. I remember being so nervous about that, but it all kind of worked out. And you just got to take that leap, and then it becomes easier and easier and easier. Then I worry, am I too salesy? I do want real relationships at the end of the day.
Yeah, so the best way, and networking is a great way to do that. But the best way to really have a strong bond with somebody and build that relationship is to find something that you mutually have in common and interest in.
Yeah.
If you tell me that you like crocheting and I pretend to like crocheting, it's not going to be too long before you found out I was bullshitting you and I don't really like crocheting.
Right.
And that actually is a negative on our potential relationship. But I think if you put any 2 people in a room together and they chat for 20 minutes or a half hour, they're going to find something.
Yep.
That they have in common that they both like. I have clients today who we go out wine tasting occasionally. I have one client, Arnie Gumowitz, diehard, lifelong Knick and Ranger fan. And so the first couple of minutes we spend when we chat every time we talk about the Knicks and the Rangers.
Right.
So you find something that you have in common, and that's the basis of building a strong relationship.
Yeah, and I'm sure your clients from 39 years ago are still your similar clients, today.
Well, a lot of them still are on a list. I have a list of folks that I've sold properties for in the past, and I keep in touch with them regularly because those are people we've already worked for, hopefully already did a great job for. They have a positive perspective on you, and whether they have more business to do or they know somebody that has business to do, that's the best source because those folks are already convinced that you can do a good job for them or their friends. So keeping in touch with people you've worked with in the past is definitely important. And I really didn't even realize that was an important thing to do until I started working with a broker coach. Okay. I have a broker coach, Rod Santamassimo from the Massimo Group. And, I first was a little skeptical about brokerage coaches, but then decided to give it a try. And it's been really fantastic and eye-opening. Rod said to me one time, Bob, how are you keeping in touch with your inactive clients? And I said, what's an inactive client? He said, well, you've sold properties for hundreds of people. They already know you, like you. You did a great job for them. How are you keeping in touch with them? And I said, I'm really not. They're just on my regular lists, and I'm not paying any special attention to them. And he says, Bob, that's a tremendous lost opportunity. Make up a list of everybody you've sold property for. Keep in touch with them. And as I make my prospecting calls, the clients I've sold property for in the past are the first group that I will call in my cycle of calls. And when I'm just calling regular property owners, I get a lead out of every 18 calls I make on average. When I call the folks I've worked with in the past, I get a lead 1 out of every 11 calls I make.
Wow. Okay.
So the efficacy of calling the folks who we've worked for in the past is much higher than the generic property owner.
Wow. I didn't know there was such thing as a broker coach. That's interesting.
Yep, I didn't know that was the case either.
We have a business coach that we use here, but not specific to our industry. That's interesting. So in your book, which I have in front of us here, there's several baseball references. Are you a big baseball fan?
I am a big baseball fan, diehard Yankee fan my whole life, and I played baseball as a kid. Okay. That's where my affinity for statistics came from.
I can tell.
And I played through college. So really enjoyed baseball.
Good for you. And one of your milestones is this idea that, that for a baseball player, the 3,000 hit is an amazing career milestone. There's really only, I looked it up actually, there's 33 players that have done it, from Pete Rose, Ty Cobb, Derek Jeter, the ones you would think of. You've been doing this almost 40 years, and you mentioned in the book that you're looking to get your 3,000th sale. Do you have plans to retire? Is this just something you're just going to do forever and ever and until you can't do it anymore?
No, never, Christian. I talk for a living and I talk to really interesting people for a living. Why would I retire? I love the business. I still love the business as much today as I did when I started. And, in real estate, there are so many very colorful personalities and characters in our business that it's a blast talking to people. And, one of the neat things is that in the course of this business, you become friends, social friends with the people you work with. And, among my friends, I have a group of 7 of us that went to kindergarten together that still play poker once a year together and still close with those guys. But other than those guys, every single friend I have is either directly or tangentially because of real estate.
Sure.
Retire? No way. And will I hit 3,000? I don't know. I'm certainly going to try like heck to do it. But, I have a soon to be 14-year-old daughter, and she keeps me young. So I try to keep in good shape, work out all the time, eat right, get plenty of sleep. And hopefully, look, Tom Brady's playing football long beyond the point at which most people stop. And, if I am fortunate enough to stay healthy for another 20, 30 years, I'd love to keep selling more buildings.
That's great. So how did you get in this industry?
Completely by accident. I'll take you back to 1981. I was a freshman at the Wharton School. Wanted to be the next Gordon Gekko like every other Wharton kid and take over Wall Street. So I was driving around northern New Jersey where I grew up, dropping my resume off at commercial banks and investment banks, looking for a summer job. Dropped my resume off at Payne Weber across the hall in Hackensack. I saw Coldwell Banker. I thought the place was a bank. Went in, dropped my resume off. They called me later that day. Hey, we'd like to interview you tomorrow. I set up the interview for the next day. This is 1981. There's no internet. So I go to the library that morning to look up this bank. And when I saw it was a real estate company, I'm like, oh, shit, I don't want to get into real estate. So, I almost didn't go on the interview, but they were the only ones hiring college kids for the summer. I took the job. Loved it from day one. When I was in the market research group, went back my next summer to run that group. And then my third summer, I actually got my New Jersey real estate license. And I was an assistant to an industrial broker, Tom Mullaney, who's still a friend of mine. And I was showing industrial buildings to people. And then when I got out of school in 84, I joined CB in Manhattan.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing that you thought it was a bank.
Complete serendipity. I think that things have a way of working out there the way they're supposed to. And I feel very fortunate that I made that mistake.
So, were you looking, were you at all in the residential side? I think of Coldwell Banker as just residential, like single family home kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, Coldwell Banker had a huge residential company, but it also had a commercial company.
Okay.
And in fact, I think when I first started working there, the company was called Coldwell Banker. And over the next several years, the name of the firm iterated to CB Commercial to differentiate it from the residential company, because a lot of people made that mistake. And then there was a time that it was owned by Sears, and then Sears spun it off. And then it went from CB Commercial to CB Richard Ellis. And then it became CBRE. So it's actually Coldwell Banker is the predecessor company to today's CBRE. But I never did residential work.
Okay. It was always on the research side.
On the, market research for the commercial company.
Okay.
And then dealing with commercial properties in northern Jersey for those summer jobs.
And ironically, that industrial is a hot market these days, still hot market. So
it sure is.
Pretty interesting. And so you said you grew up in New Jersey. What did your parents do?
My dad was a high school principal. Fortunately, not the high school that I went to, because my high school principal's son went there, and he had a very, very challenging time with his dad as the principal. So my dad was a high school principal, but in Mahwah, New Jersey. I went to high school in Hackensack, New Jersey. And my mom was a housewife.
Okay. That's awesome. And so when you started your career in the residential side, I mean, in the brokerage side, was there anyone in particular that influenced you? I mean, did you have mentors there? How did you get from sort of that early stages to very quickly going out on your own and starting Massey Knakal?
Yeah, well, my first day on the job when I showed up at CB in Manhattan, there were about 60 brokers that were leasing office space, 20 in the retail store leasing group, and there were 4 people in the investment sales area, 3 of whom had 20 years of experience, and then Paul Massey, who had just gotten out of a 1-year training program. I showed up the first day on the job, and the boss said, "Hey, Massey just started in sales a couple of weeks ago. Follow him around. He'll show you where the coffee machine is," and that kind of thing. And it became very apparent that after a day that the guys with 20 years of experience weren't going to spend a lot of time with us. So literally day 2 on the job, Paul and I said, "Hey, let's just work together. We'll split everything 50-50, see how it goes." And that was the start of a 30-year partnership. Wow. And in terms of the folks that I really looked up to, I always looked at the people who were very, very successful as mentors and people to try to emulate. And I think the one who had the biggest impression on me kind of growing up in the business was Steve Siegel, who's the global chairman of global brokerage at CBRE. Steve is a titan in the industry, and I often refer to him as kind of the Babe Ruth of brokerage, and just a great guy, great personality, super smart, very successful. And I always tried to spend as much time around Steve as I possibly could, but big influence on my brokerage career.
And so when the first sale, what is that like? You're now out on your own, it's Massey Knakal. What's that first sale? How did you make that happen?
I'll take you back to the first sale, which was at CB. We sold about a 20,000 square foot vacant commercial building at 1421 3rd Avenue between 84th and 85th. It was going to be the home of the first MRI machine in New York. And we were working with American Medical International that did that first one. And I remember them telling us about how they couldn't put it too close to the subway because the magnetic pull of the subway cars would impact the way the machine worked. And that's why it had to be on 3rd Avenue, not Lexington Avenue. But I remember very vividly that at the night before the closing, the building had a fire in it. And Paul and I nervously called up the buyer and said, "Hey, we got some bad news. There was a fire in the building last night." And he was like, "It's all right. We're going to gut the building anyway. No problem." So we dodged a bullet there. And then I remember sitting in the reception area of the lawyer's office while the closing was going on. And it seemed like it wasn't going so well. At one point, the owner came screaming out of the room, I'm leaving. And the attorney is grabbing her, telling her, "No, you have to stay." And I remember just sitting in that reception area, flipping this penny up and down. And as it turned out, that transaction did end up closing. I don't think my feet touched the ground walking back to the office. We were so excited. At the time, I think my share of that commission was that for each Paul and I was about $12,000. And we thought we were the richest guys in New York. And to this day, that penny still is on my desk. And that's the lucky penny, as we call it.
That's great.
So that was the first one.
That's great. So walk me through some of your, memorable sales. I mean, I feel like you've at some point touched almost every building in New York City. It's amazing. And I was looking through your book, and ironically, I tagged a few in here that I designed, which is kind of funny. Hilton Grand Vacations Club is that project, and then I won't bore everybody here. This residential building, and then there was this other one here. This one, this was quite an interesting building because at one point there was a TD Bank. I'm doing this and nobody can see this, but there's a TD Bank, and I remember we designed an up and over scheme. We were going to try and force the guy to, sell that piece of property. Do you recall that kind of stuff? I mean, all of these.
Every deal has a story. Every deal has a character. It's very rare that a deal is very straightforward and everything goes the way you expect it. I think probably one of my favorite deals was the sale of a small 25-foot wide 5-story building at 41 West 47th Street. That was the Gotham Bookmark building. That block, as you know, 47th between 5th and 6th is the Diamond Block. Almost every tenant there is in the jewelry or gem business. This was a building that was owned by a guy that ran a bookstore out of the building, one of the few non-jewelry buildings on the block. And it was owned by a guy named Andy Brown. And Andy decided that in the future, he was going to sell the building, so he converted his ownership of that building from a C corporation to an S corporation. When you make that conversion, you have to wait 10 years before you get the benefits of selling as an S corp as opposed to a C corp. So for many years, he was telling everybody, yeah, in 10 years, I'm going to sell the building. And then in 9 years, I'm going to sell the building. In 6 years, I'm going to sell the building. So everybody on the block knew he was going to be selling. And when it came time for him to really implement the sales process, he called me up, said, Bob, I have so many people calling me. I don't know what's going on. I sell books. I don't sell buildings. I need your help. I'm going to hire you to represent me. It was a fascinating process. There were a lot of people interested in buying the building. Most people were in the jewelry business. Sure. We think that they'd submit a bid, and then all of a sudden we'd get 2 or 3 bids right below what that bid was. And we think people were having their cousin bid and their brother bid to make their bid look better. And so we had, for a smaller building like that, it was shocking how many offers we had. And I told Andy, I said, look, we have so much interest. Let's set a bid deadline, get everybody to bid at one time and see what those bids are going to look like. It was interesting that it seemed like the market was aware of what was going on, who was bidding what, and we couldn't quite figure that out. Andy goes in the day bids are due. Andy goes into Burger's Deli right across the street from his building. And as he's checking out, the cashier says, oh, Mr. Brown, I understand that your bids are due today. And I understand your high bid is going to be $5.5 million. And he looks at her like, what? This is a cashier at a deli. So we get all the bids, and sure enough, we have 2 bids that are $5.5 million, and those are the high bids out of 20 some odd bids. So as it turned out, somebody on the block was paying an employee of the bookstore to look at all the faxes I was sending over and tell him what the bids were that were coming in. Because in those days, we faxed everything over. We didn't have email. And so we kind of figured out that this was going on. So the way that we dealt with it is, I said to Andy, I said, tell your attorney to start drafting a contract. But let's tell the 2 high bidders that they weren't the high bid, which is not a lie, because they were not the high bid. They were one of 2 that were the same. So they weren't the high bid. And tell everybody else that they were too low, and just go totally quiet on the market and let the rumors start. So this is what we did. We called up the top 2 high bidders. Sorry, you were not the high bid. And we're drafting a contract. Okay, and just let that sit. Day goes by, 2 days, 3 days, 4th day, get a call from one of the bidders. Hey, what would happen if I raised my bid to $5.7 million? Do you think I have a chance? I said, I don't know, submit it. We'll see what happens. And we just went totally quiet on the market. The market came to us, and nobody could figure out what the heck was going on. I didn't send any more faxes. All communication was done by phone or by sealed envelope with the owner. And we ended up selling it for $7.5 million. Oh, wow. And I actually won Rebney's Most Ingenious Deal of the Year for that transaction. So, I've done transactions for as much as almost $400 million. But that one was a relatively small one, but one of the more memorable ones because of the tremendous cast of characters we were dealing with.
That's a great story. So you write an article for Commercial Observer called Concrete Thoughts. And I was reading through some of the articles. One thing that came to mind, and I'd like to spend a little time kind of discussing this, and that is sort of the post-COVID New York City. And you and I, when we had lunch a few weeks back, we talked a little bit about it. I'm fascinated by sort of the ripple effect of COVID and you know what it did in New York City, what it's done to office. Although I don't think it's as bad as it was predicted, even let's say at the beginning of 22. You know, and one of the articles you talk about walking around the streets of Manhattan, looking at every building, you know, and kind of mapping it out as a potential development site. What post-COVID do you see as sort of the big impact on real estate in New York City?
Well, I think there are several impacts. One, I think that the utilization of office space has to be and is being reimagined, recreated. Reimagined is such a buzzword. I don't like to use it. But the way we think of office and the way we use office is changing. And I think that's been a major impact. I think that it's kind of forced us to look at some of the older, obsolete office buildings we have in town. You know, we went into the pandemic with about 25 million feet of office space vacant. There's about 25 million feet under construction. And if aggregate demand goes down by even, say, 10%, we're going to have a heck of a lot of vacant office space. So I think that the city can be very creative and create incentives for the private sector to convert a lot of that older, obsolete stock into alternative uses, i.e. affordable housing would be a great one. So I think that to the extent that the city could implement a 421G type of tax abatement program that was very, very successful, converting non-residential buildings to residential downtown after 9/11, I think the same thing could be used to convert a lot of buildings in Midtown and Midtown South into residential uses from non-residential use. I think that's one of the byproducts. I think that also we see that access to outdoor space is something that is very important. Access to an area within an apartment where you could set up a little office or at least a workspace, if not a separate office, because folks are going to be working from home more. And I think that's also one of the byproducts of the pandemic is there's really not as clearly defined separation between work life and home life. Especially with all the gadgets we have today, you basically could be connected to work 24/7. So I think people are very comfortable working remotely and are able to do that. So to have a little bit of space in an apartment where you can set up an area to work is important. And so I think we're going to see different designs for interiors of apartments. So there's a little bit more defined work area.
Yep.
But things like that, I think that is something that is going to change the way real estate is used moving forward.
Can New York City survive on, you know, let's call it 60% office occupancy?
I think it can. I think that the numbers for card swipes, I think, is a little skewed because I wonder what quote unquote full occupancy really is.
Right. Because
at any particular time, if you're in 2018, people are sick. They don't come to work. People are traveling for business. People are traveling for vacation. What's full occupancy?
Right.
Is it 82%? Is it 71%? I'm curious as to what those numbers are. But I think that from the owner's perspective, what matters is economic occupancy. From a retailer's perspective, physical occupancy is important because they want people to be going to the office so they can stop in for lunch or buy something.
The restaurants are busy here in New York.
Yeah, they sure are. So I think that we need to slowly but surely get back to people coming back to work. I think hybrid work is going to be part of the horizon moving forward. But, people need to be back in the office environment. And I think for corporate culture, it's essential to be working with people. From just a human being perspective, I think people don't like to be isolated. That's why if you're really bad, you go into solitary confinement in jail. Right. And I think also, for the learning curve for young people, there's so much that you can learn being in the office environment that you can't learn from being on a Zoom.
Yep.
There's so much that you pick up just being in the environment through osmosis, overhearing a conversation. You're in the kitchenette getting a drink, and you overhear somebody talking about a deal, and that makes you ask a question. And all of these things that help a young person learn that you're not afforded those opportunities when you're on a Zoom or working from home. So, I think for corporate culture, for just human reasons, and for the growth of younger people, being in the office, I think, is really, really important. And I think more and more companies are going to realize that.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think if you do it creatively, I mean, the way we do a lot of our corporate interiors these days, our own office being an example of being creative about how you do it. We actually provide social space specifically for social gatherings. We made a commitment to make sure that we do them more to create that office culture so we can have more all-in kind of get-togethers, less all-in kind of meetings, but more all-in social. And then there's the heads down space. And then there's maybe a little bit of space where we play music in the back for those that need a little bit more, juice in their day kind of thing. Right. And I think from a corporate, when we were to lay out, let's say we did a layout of a Peloton, we did Peloton, we would count sort of every seat as a space that a human would occupy. And then we would do all this ancillary stuff. So if there was a bar or there was lounge seating, we would count those as additional seats. So everybody had 2 seats for every, one person, right? Clearly that's different now. We don't do that. We actually are taking less and less in terms of it's now not even quite 1 for 1. We're trying to mix in those percentages. So you're still getting offices, but you're getting a little bit smaller, or maybe you're getting them reconfigured in a little bit of a different way. So I think that there's a lot of positives that do come out of it at the end of the day. But I think time will tell to see kind of where it all ends up. But it's interesting time for New York City for sure. Back to conversions, and I know this is something that you've talked about. Not every office building can make a great residential building, right? And what happens to those buildings that the owners can no longer make the finances work, and they can't convert it to hotel or residential just because of the way it's boxed in, or it's just too big. You end up with 30-foot corridors or something in the middle to get legal light and air on either side. What do you see kind of happening with a lot of those building types?
Yeah, I think it depends case to case. Some buildings, depending on what the density potential for that particular parcel are, maybe get knocked down. Or maybe you have to, in a very dense floor plate building, you have to create some kind of a light shaft or light well in the center of the building. Or maybe there's a way to change the zoning so that you could have hybrid spaces with apartments on the outside and office on the inside, for a live-work type of scenario. But I think that, buildings are going to need to be repurposed. Again, our office stock is very, very old, and no matter how much you renovate it, you can't change ceiling heights really, unless you take some slabs out. Can't get rid of columns unless you want the building to fall over. So, there are a number of things that will prohibit older stock from being truly competitive with new buildings. And so I think repurposing them is, an obvious way to bring them back to competitiveness.
Awesome. So as we wrap up here, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd want to talk about?
No, I just, it's always fascinating to hear how different service providers do their business in our business. And you think about building a new building, all the different folks that are involved, and how, the layout of floors is so impactful as to whether you need that extra parcel in a land assemblage to make the floor more efficient, or you need to structure certain things in your Zelda so that you can build the floor more efficiently. And that efficiency all deals with layouts and room sizes and things, so stuff that you guys deal with all the time. And it really comes down to, potentially impacting the acquisition strategy that a developer has. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what you build, you have to get people to rent it or people to buy it.
Exactly.
And if they won't do that if it's not laid out well and gives them a good feeling. So, at the end of the day, I think what you guys do is also very, very impactful on the success of a project. And it's just, again, remarkable how many different hands touch something to make it work.
That's perfect. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for your time, for being guest here on the Anti-Architect podcast. I really appreciate you coming in, sharing your insights on the commercial real estate world, and honestly, for really helping shape New York. I mean, I think you've had quite an impact over the last 40 years, and you have 40 more to go. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been great to be here, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So to see and read more about Bob Knakal, you can go directly to the JLL website. There's a whole bunch of links on there. His LinkedIn is Bob Knakal, one word, and then check out the Commercial Observer Concrete Thoughts articles that he has. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks.